Chapter 4. No one else was supposed to come to the cabin. Asher ran to the door and opened it. Astounded, he saw Chris and his parents, all of them with big smiles on their faces. Yet again, Asher had been completely deceived by his mom and dad in a pleasantly surprising way. This had inevitably popped his euphoria bubble, but it had been completely worth it, Asher thought, because just looking at Chris was immediately making him realize that this was the only person who he was willing to trust with the information regarding the wolf. A sudden urge to let everything out took over Asher. "Happy birthday, man," Chris said as he opened his arms wide and gave Asher a big hug. "Thanks, bro. And thank you for being here too, Mr. and Mrs. Coleman," Asher said, looking at Chris's parents, who responded with tight hugs of their own. Asher welcomed them inside. All the adults sat at the dining table and began to chat eagerly. The boys had stayed in the living room. Before Chris could sit down on the sofa, Asher stopped him by putting a hand on his right shoulder. He swallowed hard and bit the inside of his lower lip as he prepared himself to speak. "Bro, that look," Chris said, slightly widening his eyes. "Don't tell me. Something important has happened and you want to tell me, but maybe it's not a good something?" That's exactly how their connection worked, almost telepathically. Asher nodded. "Hey parents, we're going outside to do some exploring. We've got our phones with us, so no worries." Chris said this in such a natural way that even Asher felt like the both of them had planned this activity in advance. The adults were already deep in conversation by then and only replied with some vague warnings about being careful and not forgetting their coats. After this, Chris took the lead and headed to the door. A little confused and nervous, Asher followed his best friend, and together they left the cabin. "Come on, man. Let's find a good spot to talk," Chris suggested as he walked away from the cabin. Asher walked behind Chris in silence. A thought struck him as he trod through tall pine trees. He and Chris had never really had any super serious talks. Nothing that warranted it had happened to any of them before. Asher's stomach suddenly became a knot when he understood that this would be the first time that he had that kind of conversation with Chris. What if Chris decided in the end that Asher was actually crazy? What if their relationship ended because of this, and Asher lost his best friend? Would Chris be the first person to become scared of him and push him away? For a moment, Asher thought about what would happen if the roles were reversed. Would he believe Chris, or would he fear him? Asher thought of himself as a very rational person, so he imagined that he would likely have a lot of trouble believing the whole wolf story. And Chris was pretty logical as well, one of the reasons why he was so good at math and the current captain of the school's math club. But at the same time, Chris was very different from Asher in a lot of other aspects. Maybe, hopefully, this could play in Asher's favor, too. Unlike Asher, Chris was an only child in a well-off family of 3. Both his mom and dad were African American. Chris had wanted to have siblings, but his mom had developed a health condition very early on that prevented this from happening. Because of this, Chris frequently told Asher how thankful he was for having met him. He used to say that when the two of them had met in the school playground, back when they were around 7 years old, he had instantly felt a brotherly connection towards Asher. Their friendship had developed so quickly and organically that the same feeling had already grown in Asher, too, after a few months. They played with the rest of their classmates, but they had the best time when it was just the two of them. This was because they shared a lot of the same interests, such as playing soccer as well as enjoying the same types of video games. All this led to the establishment of their weekly sleepovers. At the beginning, they would spend hours playing platforming games like the Super Mario titles. As they grew older, the games they liked became more complex. They started playing famous franchises such as Pokémon and The Legend of Zelda. Of course, they always kept up with their old friend Mario and his new releases. The red-hatted, mustachioed man was someone that they simply would never get over. It was the foundation of their early gaming days, and in a way, of their relationship. Around the age of 12, they started getting more savvy with their gaming knowledge and discovered the world of indie games and PC gaming. That Christmas, both Asher and Chris asked their respective parents for a desktop gaming computer. Naturally, this was only an addition to their video gaming arsenal and never a substitution to consoles like the GameStation series. Their sleepovers then turned into a combination of playing big and well-known AAA games, as well as small hidden gems with lots of potential like One Shot, or more popular indie games such as Ori and the Blind Forest and A Short Hike. They loved combat and exploration, but they both also gradually developed a big liking for complicated storylines and characters. That's what finally led them to the Vista series, their ultimate and favorite video games. Asher and Chris started playing the first Vista game when they were around 13 years old. This was also when another big subject entered their lives: romance. The boys had always told each other everything without hesitating, so it was only natural for both of them to immediately tell the other one when they kind of started liking someone. One particular topic on which they invested a lot of their time at that age was that of their first kiss. In general, Chris was braver and more confident than Asher. He always wanted to be the first one to fight against bosses in games, or the one to ask their parents for permission to do some new activity that was a bit riskier than the usual stuff. Chris had been the first, and the only one of the two, to try to learn how to do a bicycle kick in soccer. Yes, he had broken an arm in the process, but he had eventually learned how to successfully do a chilena. Asher had to admit that he really admired how brave Chris was. He was a natural risk-taker. Because of Asher's lack of courage in comparison, he had known that there was a very high probability that Chris would be the first one of them to experience kissing a girl. His estimations had been right. That Thursday, when Chris and Carol Sato kissed, was a day of huge celebration among the boys. Asher was thrilled for Chris, although he felt a little sad for himself. Nonetheless, he tried to feel better by telling himself that they were both already late bloomers either way. After many, many months of repeating that to himself, Asher finally shared a kiss with Marisa Garcia. Chris was incredibly excited for Asher, and the boys celebrated by having a special sleepover where they asked Asher's mom to make them some pupusas. Of course, they didn't reveal what it was that they were celebrating. Talking to adults about girls was still embarrassing to do back then when they were 13. "Well, this looks like a great place to talk about crazy things, doesn't it?" Chris said with a chuckle. Asher knew that his friend was only joking because he didn't even know anything yet. But it just so happened that the word crazy was a very serious one for Asher right now. His stomach became even more upset, and he felt like he couldn't speak, like he'd maybe end up throwing up if he did. A nearby rock looked safer than trying to stay on his feet. After making his way slowly towards it, Asher sat down. "Hey, Asher, seriously, we're far enough from the cabin. No one can hear you here. You can tell me what's happened," Chris added in a warm and calm tone. Asher's heart started to beat faster as he made a great effort to speak. I don't know how. My stomach is like upside down, like I'm close to throwing up. My mouth is so dry. My mind is getting foggy, like it wants to put me to sleep or something. And my heart is racing. I just don't know how. I don't know. Maybe I ate something that made me sick. I don't know. Only Chris's feet were visible to Asher because he couldn't stop staring at the ground. It was as if the dirt and the grass and the bits of snow were merging into one single color. It looked like the water of a lake, and Asher felt like he was being sucked into it slowly but steadily. The more Asher talked, the more he heard himself speaking awkwardly, slowly, and making an unusually high amount of pauses and repetitions. An increasing level of embarrassment crept in, and Asher wanted to swim to the depths of the lake and simply stay there. "It's okay, man. Everything's okay," Chris said slowly as he got closer to the rock on which Asher was sitting. "You know, I was thinking, do you remember how I told you about my mom having depression after she found out that she wouldn't be able to have any more children?"
"Yes,"
Asher replied, blinking rapidly as he attempted to look up and meet Chris's eyes. This was a tough subject for Chris, and Asher wanted to give him his full attention. The sudden worry for his friend had been strong enough to pull Asher a little out of his crisis. He did his best effort to focus on Chris's face and listen to his words. "Well, her depression eventually led her to experience anxiety. I don't think I've told you about this before. Maybe because I don't really like to think about those days," Chris said as he crossed his arms. "I was very little, so I didn't notice any of this. The only things that I saw were related to her depression," Chris added, taking a deep breath in. "But when I was older, she explained to me all about anxiety. She told me that her anxiety started in her mind, with lots of worrying thoughts bubbling up. And when these got too strong, her anxiety also manifested in her internal bodily sensations. She said that anxiety was like feeling uneasy, worried, or nervous, but to an extreme extent." Chris looked at the ground briefly and kicked a small pebble with his right foot. After giving out a heavy sigh, Chris continued. "She told me it would make her feel all kinds of different things in her body. Sometimes her heart would start racing, and she would feel a strong pressure on her chest, making her feel like she couldn't breathe normally. She would even end up breathing very fast, which made her feel even more anxious." Chris was standing much closer to Asher at this point. He sat down on the rock that was next to him and added, "Other times, her thoughts would start racing, all of them scary thoughts, and her body would start shaking, sometimes along with all the other heart rate and breathing stuff." Another bitter sigh left Chris's body. She also had stomach problems. Anxiety could make her go to the bathroom a lot, like if she were sick, or she would have an ugly sensation in her stomach that wouldn't go away. My mom described that as having a knot in her stomach that would be constantly moving around in a way that touched all the walls inside. She said she hated that feeling. It even made her feel like she was going to throw up. Sometimes it would stay like that for hours on end. A sad expression washed over Chris's face. She couldn't concentrate when she was anxious. She couldn't think straight, and when it was really bad, she couldn't even hold a conversation. And when her symptoms got even worse, she would become scared that she was going crazy, that she was about to lose her mind. Chris shifted his gaze towards the ground for a moment. Asher could tell that it had been hard for him to think about all that. He suddenly felt sad too. Sad for Chris's mom, sad for Chris, sad for anyone who had ever felt like that. "I'm really sorry for what your mom went through, Chris. It sounds like torture," Asher said quietly, staring at the ground. "Yeah, it was." Thankfully, she was able to get professional help with her depression and anxiety. She says that after some time and a lot of hard work, she finally started feeling better. That's good. I hope she's still doing well. She is, Chris said, a woeful expression on his face. You know, this isn't the easiest thing for me to talk about. I always feel really down when I think about how much my mom suffered, and also about how I was never able to help her. It makes me feel so powerless. I'm really sorry about how you feel, man. Thank you for trusting me. There was silence for a moment, as both boys kept staring at the ground. Asher was doing a bit better, but his mind still felt foggy, and he really couldn't process everything that he had just heard. He wanted to help more, to find something better to say, but his brain was working so slowly, and his whole being still felt half sunk in the lake. After a long sigh, Chris looked at Asher again. You know, I didn't tell you all this just to share. I did it for you. Chris made a short pause. Those last words took Asher by surprise so much that they caused his brain to wake up a bit. What do you mean? Well, when we got here to this clearing, the way you looked, what you said, the way you talked, it all instantly reminded me of my mom's words. Chris made a short pause and uncrossed his arms. I don't think that what you were feeling in your mouth, heart, mind, or stomach had anything to do with something that you ate, bro. It sounded like you were feeling very anxious. Is that what's been going on? Have you been feeling, like, extremely nervous or worried? Chris asked, sounding a little concerned. It took Asher a moment to put it all together. Then he felt completely stupid for not having figured it out immediately. Chris was evidently using his mom's experience to show him that what he was feeling was very similar and that he might have anxiety too. It was such a simple concept, and it had taken Asher quite the effort to get it. He felt very, very dumb. His shame somehow contributed to making his mind less foggy and a little more normal. Chris, I'm so embarrassed. I can't believe I didn't understand from the beginning. I know that wasn't easy for you. I really appreciate the effort you did to help me, dude. It's okay, man. Don't worry about it. I just want to help. Asher nodded with a thankful look in his eyes. He took a moment to think. Staring at the sky, Asher bit the inside of his right cheek as he analyzed and compared how he had felt to Mrs. Coleman's experience. Well, yes, Asher finally replied as he shifted his focus to his shoes. In the last hours, I've experienced a lot of what your mom described. It's all been so intense, but it's also not that simple. Because Asher began to freeze. He didn't know how to say it. He wanted to, but his brain was becoming foggy again. He didn't want to miss his chance, though. He was so close. Without thinking much more about it, Asher shut his eyes tightly, and he clenched his fists just as tight. He felt like he was jumping off a plane mid-flight when he yelled, "Because there's a wolf involved!"